The thick fog hung over the abandoned streets of Pripyat, like a shroud of mystery enveloping the deserted city. Jake and Ben, two friends from the UK, decided to fulfill their bold dream and embarked on a tour of Pripyat and the Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine. They were excited at the prospect of seeing the site of one of the worst man-made disasters in human history. As they arrived in the exclusion zone, the first thing that struck them was the sight of the abandoned city. They felt the weight of the past, like a heavy cloak that couldn't be shaken off. The abandoned buildings and streets looked ghostly, as if they expected the residents to reappear at any moment to resume their lives. But life had left these places, leaving only echoes of the past. Walking the streets, they noticed how nature inexorably reclaimed these lands. The houses, abandoned after the accident at the station, looked grim and menacing, as if they spoke of past fears and horrors. Some buildings had already begun to crumble under the influence of weather conditions and the pressure of nature, which freely invaded every corner of the city, enveloping the ruins with its green fingers. But the most amazing and frightening sight was ahead, the Chernobyl nuclear power station. The huge concrete sarcophagus of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, covering the damaged reactor, rises like a monument to silent tragedy, forever enclosed in steel embrace. Its massive contours, like guardians of time, stood steadfastly, blocking access to the memory of deep sorrow. This sarcophagus bears the loud imprint of the moment when human activity collided with the unstoppable force of nature. Inside this monument lies not only a radiation void but also a lesson forged in fire and forgotten in the darkness of history. As they explored the surroundings of the station, they noticed a strange light in one of the abandoned houses. Their curiosity outweighed their fear, and they decided to investigate what was happening inside. Entering the building, they encountered a group of people whose faces were disfigured by radiation. The eyes of these people gleamed in the darkness, their steps heavy and unnatural. "What's going on here?" Jake asked, feeling a shiver run through his body. But all he heard in response was a sinister laughter that echoed from the depths of the room. And in the next moment, this group lunged at them, emitting inhuman cries and bursting out of the darkness, like ghosts of the past returned to deal with unwitting witnesses to their secrets. Terrified, Jake and Ben recoiled and rushed for the exit, but the door slammed shut in front of them. They were trapped in this abandoned hell, fighting for survival. The two of them, trapped, desperately searched for a way out of the abandoned house. But every door, every window seemed locked and sealed. People, distorted by radiation, were approaching them, emitting frenzied screams, their shadows dancing on the walls, as if beckoning death. "We need to get out of here as fast as we can," Jake yelled, fighting the fear pounding in his heart. Ben, clenching his fists, agreed, and they decided to bypass this group of irradiated people, seeking to find an exit at the other end of the building. They slowly made their way through the dark corridors, feeling the eyes of the inhabitants of this place watching their every move. Every creak of the wooden steps, every rustle of leaves falling from the ceiling, seemed like a harbinger of doom. Suddenly they heard a screech and the sound of running feet. Turning around, they saw a group of disfigured beings rushing toward them, their elongated arms reaching out to them like deadly claws. "Run!" Ben shouted, and without hesitation, they ran forward, through the labyrinth of corridors and rooms, their hearts ready to burst from their chests with fear. But eventually, hope shone in their eyes. They found an old staircase leading outside through the back door. The gleaming daylight penetrated through the dusty windows, inviting them to salvation. They prayed that the steps wouldn't collapse under their weight and hurried toward the exit, striving for freedom. Their hands gripped the cold metal handle, and they forcefully pulled open the door, bursting outside as if escaping from hell itself. Both of them collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, feeling the fresh air fill their lungs, the sunlight driving away the darkness and fear. Jake and Ben, having escaped the building, ran as if chased by ghosts. But the horrors they had seen remained with them. In the alleyways they encountered radiation-deformed animals, two-headed dogs, deer with 5 legs, and numerous other creatures whose bodies were distorted by the lethal energy. The hearts of the friends beat in unison as they continued their run, striving to leave this cursed place. Their path led them across a bridge over the river, and when they found themselves above the water, they saw huge catfish there, whose sizes made them tremble with horror. The gaze of these creatures seemed filled with darkness and mystery, as if the water had turned into a mirror reflecting their fears and nightmares. Finally, they emerged from Chernobyl, their breath heavy with fear, their bodies drained of exhaustion and tension. Upon reaching the hospital, they were told that they had received a dose of radiation in the forbidden zone known as the Red Forest, where they had accidentally wandered. All these events and people with animals they encountered turned out to be hallucinations they experienced after being irradiated during their stay there. This explained the strange visions that haunted them during their escape. Their path to recovery was long and difficult. Every day was filled with suffering and struggle with the consequences of radiation. But even after leaving the hospital and returning home, the shadow of Chernobyl remained with them. Every glance in the mirror reminded them of what they had endured. Every sigh reminded them of the fragility of life and the mercilessness of nature. They did not forget about their adventure, about those who were left behind in the abandoned city, and about those who are still dealing with the consequences of the accident. Their story became a warning that human pride and the desire for power can lead to unspeakable disaster and suffering. In the shadow of abandoned buildings and surrounded by a bleak emptiness, 6 volunteers from a charitable organization slowly made their way through the streets of the Fukushima Exclusion Zone. Their task seemed noble, to research and restore this devastated land after the disaster. But they could not foresee that fear and horror would engulf them like a shadow, haunting their every step. The first few days in the zone passed peacefully. They conducted radiation measurements, assessed the extent of damage, and planned future work. But with each passing hour, the air became heavy, as if nature itself protested against their presence. The first symptoms of the zone's strange influence manifested as faint whispers in the volunteers' heads, causing them to doubt their sanity. At night, they fell into nightmares, seeing distorted images of mutants in frozen time, like scenes from a horror movie. After several days in the exclusion zone, the cracks in their psyche began to deepen. Group members increasingly lost their sense of time and space, as if the zone itself was consuming their consciousness. They noticed how minutes turned into hours, and hours into whole days, as if time here moved at its own distorted pace. Their physical condition began to deteriorate. Some developed strange rashes, while others experienced bouts of dizziness and nausea. But they continued to work, ignoring their own fears and symptoms, convinced that it was just stress from the surrounding environment. As time went on, their connection to the outside world became weaker and weaker. Radios and smartphones stopped receiving signals, as if communication waves were being absorbed by some unknown force in the zone. They remained in complete isolation, cut off from any contact with the outside world, abandoned in the dark abyss of oblivion. After losing contact with the outside world, some group members began to consider leaving, but their opinions were divided. Some felt obligated to complete their mission in the exclusion zone and fulfill their obligations to the charity organization. They considered their work essential and continued to believe that they could help people in distress after the disaster. Some of the volunteers denied the seriousness of their symptoms, hoping they were temporary and would pass with time. They viewed their nightmares and strange sensations as manifestations of stress or fatigue from their hard work in the zone. In the end, those willing to return were in the minority, and the group decided to continue their research. But over time, things only got worse for them. They found strange traces in the dust on the floor and handprints on the dusty windows, although none of them remembered anyone passing through these places. But they couldn't be sure if these traces were left by mutants or simply their own imagination, which began to come under attack from the sinister atmosphere of the zone. Inside the group, strange changes began to occur. They became increasingly suspicious of each other, as if the zone was sowing seeds of misanthropy and suspicion in them. Their conversations were filled with silence and unspoken words, each of them afraid to express their true feelings, fearing they could be used against them. The nightmares became increasingly real, engulfing them even in waking moments. They saw mutants in every dark corner, heard whispers from abandoned houses, as if beckoning them into their distorted world. The atmosphere of tension and fear continued to escalate. Even in broad daylight, they felt like they were being watched, that dark eyes lurked in the abandoned houses. But when they turned to check, no one was there, only ominous silence and emptiness. They realized they were not only fighting for survival in this zone, but also for their own sanity and mental equilibrium. But each of them wondered how much more they could endure under the pressure of fear and hopelessness before the zone finally consumed them. With each passing day in the exclusion zone, their group was getting closer and closer to complete collapse. 6 volunteers who previously acted as one now felt ruptures and divisions within their group. Impatience and fear permeated each of them, clouding their judgment and making every decision increasingly difficult. Their attempts to figure out what was happening in this zone often ended in vain. They found various records and notes left by those who had previously tried to return to this place, but they were either incomprehensible or corrupted by radiation and time. This only intensified their sense of hopelessness and despair. Ultimately, growing paranoia became the end for their group. The first victim was the one who, due to distrust of the others, decided to leave but approached the radiation source too closely and perished, unable to endure the high levels of radiation for long. His death shocked the others, but they continued their work, diligently trying to ignore their fears. Then one of the volunteers, who decided to spend the night alone in one of the abandoned houses, disappeared without a trace. When they tried to find him, they only discovered his backpack and emptiness inside the house. Silently and unnoticed, he vanished, as if swallowed by the zone itself. The third member of the group, unable to withstand the nervous tension and oppressive atmosphere, began to experience panic attacks. He ran into the darkness one night and never returned. The searches yielded no results, and their group dwindled once again. Later, during the exploration of another house, one of the remaining group members became the victim of another hallucination episode. He saw before him a person disfigured by radiation to the point that he mistook him for a monster. In an attempt to flee, he fell from the staircase of the second floor of the house and sustained injuries incompatible with life. The 2 remaining volunteers, ultimately, could not withstand the psychological pressure and mutual suspicion. They began to argue, blaming each other for all the misfortunes that befell them. In the end, one of them left, leaving the other alone in the grim and dangerous environment of the exclusion zone. His fate, like that of the other 2 missing persons, remained a mystery. Finally, when only one of them remained, he found himself on the brink of sanity, surrounded by his fears and darkness. His last thoughts were that the Fukushima exclusion zone had swallowed him and his comrades, leaving only traces of horror and destruction in its wake. He wandered the streets, losing the last shreds of his sanity. Sensing the growing fear, he realized that this nightmare would never end. But suddenly, through the darkness and despair, a faint hope penetrated, the possibility of leaving this zone, leaving behind all the suffering and horrors. During his aimless wanderings, he stumbled upon a security checkpoint standing at the entrance to the exclusion zone. When he emerged into the light, his body was ravaged, his mind shaken, but he was alive. He found himself outside the exclusion zone, in the civilized world, where radiation and fears were merely terrible nightmares. He realized that he had survived not only thanks to his strength and endurance, but also thanks to his hope and will to live. He vowed never to return to those dark expanses where fear and horror reigned over everything. But even now, as he tried to forget the nightmares of the zone, he knew that a part of him would remain there forever, buried beneath layers of darkness and despair.